Hi, Krystal Jackson with Barbie Jackson Insurance to talk to you today about Tennessee dealership insurance. Tennessee dealership insurance is very important to protect businesses who are in the operation of selling motorized items, autos, RVs, motorcycles, commercial vehicles, etc. What we're going to talk about today is the coverage that's required for your state, as well as optional coverages to make sure that your business is protected from the many different obstacles that you may face and to protect your operations. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is understanding what types of coverages your business may need. The most basic and obvious form is the liability. And this is going to protect if somebody sues the business for your operations. You may also need to include property coverage, whether it be for your inventory or for your building. If you have employees, we need to talk about workers' compensation insurance. And then we also have a bond we'll get into. So let's start with the liability. The state of Tennessee requires that you have $300,000 per occurrence, $600,000 aggregate liability limits. So what does that mean? Well, first off, we're going to talk about the auto liability. As a business that is in the operation of driving, we'll just say vehicles or other items like that, there's an exposure that if you get into an at-fault accident. And in this case, you would have $300,000 of liability to pay out for property damage and bodily injury to a person that you may cause harm to. The other component of a garage liability policy that's specific to a dealership is going to be other than auto liability. This is important for your premise, your actual location. So for example, a customer has come onto your lot to look at a vehicle and they trip and fall, or this classic slip and fall claims. You would have an additional $300,000 in liability for those incidences. Now let's talk about that $600,000 aggregate. That is only going to apply to those other than auto or premises claims. There is no cap to auto liability claims. But if you have multiple claims relating to those slip and falls or regarding your operations, maybe selling the vehicle, you've had a claim from a client, then you would have a cap at $600,000 for the policy term, which standard is a year. The next, let's go into property coverages. Now, I don't like to consider the inventory as property because oftentimes when we consider property, we're talking about building, but it is important that we address the inventory. It is not required in the state of Tennessee that you cover your inventory. That is something that's going to be specific to your operations. Some businesses will only have one or two vehicles and they're maybe not dealing in high-end autos. They'd rather take the risk of not covering their vehicles. However, you may have 100, 200, a million in inventory vehicles. And if you don't elect to purchase, and we call this coverage dealer's open lot or dealer's blanket, then those items would not be covered or paid for in the event of a claim. We also can talk about your building. Do you own the building? Do you want coverage for it? If you don't, do you have contents inside your office, tools and equipment for working on your inventory vehicles? Those are also not included and covered under a standard policy and would need to be added to make sure that you are adequately protected. I want to discuss a little bit while we're still talking about the property coverage of what a furnished and non-furnished auto coverage includes. And this will also encompass the liability coverage as well. As a dealership, most owners don't have a personal vehicle. They opt to drive an inventory vehicle for personal use. The standard garage policy will only cover the liability and the dealer's open lot, the physical damage for the vehicle, if it's used in the course of the business operations. So for example, driving it to the repair facility, to and from the auction, errands for the business is all going to be covered. But as soon as you drive that vehicle home in the evening, if you get into an accident, there's no coverage unless you opt to include furnished auto liability. And then you would be covered for using those vehicles for both business and personal use. This is applied to every individual owner and or employee in the business. So if you have a salesman that is offered a perk of a furnished auto, you can include the coverage for them. It is not a blanket coverage for the whole policy. Next, let's talk about workers' compensation. What is workers' compensation? This is what's going to help protect your business if an employee is injured while on the job site. Maybe you have a mechanic that works in the business to repair vehicles, or a detailer, or it could be your salesman, and they get hurt while either working on the vehicle, or let's take the more common occurrence, which is they're driving a vehicle, whether it be test driving or with a customer on a test drive, and there's an accident. Whether it's at fault or not, without workers' compensation, your employees would not be covered for any injuries they sustain. It's very important to discuss this, as it may not be required if you only have a couple employees, but just because the state doesn't require it, you are not free from the liability of them being injured while working with you. Next, let's get into the surety bond. First off, what is a surety bond? Surety bond is what's going to protect the business from basically business practices. So let's say you sell a vehicle and there's an issue with the title and it doesn't go through, or you don't have it and you sold a vehicle that you didn't actually have titled ownership for, and that client makes a claim to the state for bad business practices. That is where the bond is going to come into play. The state of Tennessee requires that all dealerships have a $50,000 bond. So in addition to purchasing at a minimum your garage liability, you will also need to purchase that bond to not only protect your business, to protect your customers, but also to be in compliance with the state. So to summarize for Tennessee, all you have to have is a $300,000 occurrence, $600,000 aggregate, garage liability policy, and a $50,000 surety bond. But it's important to find an agent. Us here at Barbie Jackson are very knowledgeable to help you build a policy or policies to make sure that all of the different facets of your business are covered correctly and completely, so that in the event of a claim, you can rest assured that things will be handled and you will be protected. If you have any questions, we're always happy to discuss it, and we would love to provide a quote. You can get more information on our website, barbiejackson.com, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video.